Let's get around together and sing the campfire song. CAMPFRESONG song. If you don't think that we can sing it faster, then you're wrong. It'll help if you just sing along. Fuck that. What's good, YouTube? We are back to another reaction video. We're going to be reacting to how inland waterways work. I have no idea what the hell is a waterway. It's same school. I saw fire and I saw water. So I was like, okay, let's go. This is channel, smash that button, subscribe, comment down below. Let's get into it.
There is perhaps no single geographic feature that has advanced the American economy more than the Mississippi River. That's because
MISSISSIPPI. I think I spelled it so wrong.
nowhere else on Earth has a river been crafted into this long of a navigable commercial waterway. Nowhere else can one float a barge 1,800 miles or 2,900 kilometers down a river without encountering one stretch of low water, one bout of rapids, one rock in the way, one single obstacle to seamless commercial navigation. And compounding this waterway supremacy is its tributaries. The Tennessee River extends navigability as far as Knoxville, the Arkansas as far as Tulsa, the Missouri to Sioux City, the Illinois to Chicago, and the Ohio extends almost 1,000 river miles from the Mississippi, connecting Pittsburgh to all the rest of the Mississippi River region. The simple fact that goods from Pittsburgh or Minneapolis or Omaha or anywhere else on this map can be transported exclusively by barge as far as New Orleans, then transferred onto ocean-going vessels bound for anywhere, cannot be overstated. Trucks can move a ton of cargo about 145 miles with a gallon of fuel. Trains, and the reduced friction born out of steel-on-steel contact, extend that gallon to 477 miles. But the vessels used on the Mississippi are able to transport that same ton as far as 647 miles on a gallon of fuel. And the cost differential is even greater than the efficiency one due to scale. A single barge equals the capacity of 35 rail cars or 134 trucks, but a single tug can push upwards of 30, sometimes even 40 barges, leading to tremendous economies of scale. By one estimate, while trucks cost an average of $5.35 per ton per mile and trains $2.53, tugs transport that same ton a mile at a cost of just 97 cents. The friction of distance just works differently in the United States. Especially because beyond the Mississippi and its tributaries, there's still the entire Great Lakes system. The Sioux Locks in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, allow for navigation from Lake Superior to the rest of the Great Lakes. By some measures, these are America's most important locks, as nearly 100% of the country's iron core pellets pass through them on their way to lakeside processing plants in Indiana and Ohio. But if not carrying iron, a vessel from Duluth can float through Lake Huron, then Erie, then take this Canadian canal system that bypasses the impassable Niagara Falls, then make its way through the St. Lawrence Seaway system to access the Atlantic Ocean. Add on the Columbia River in the Pacific Northwest, connecting inland ports as far as Idaho to the ocean, the Sacramento Deepwater Ship Canal, connecting California's capital to San Francisco Bay, the Hudson River, extending navigability through New York State, and a few others. The U.S. boasts over 12,000 miles, or 19,000 navigable inland waterways. That's a longer transportation system than the entire rail network of the United Kingdom. But perhaps the greatest indicator of just how important America's inland waterways are is how involved the federal government is in running them. DC doesn't really run transportation systems. The rails are almost entirely privately owned, airports are primarily handled by local governments, even interstates, the federal network of highways, are just funded by DC, but actually owned and run by the states themselves. The Mississippi and these other navigable inland waterways are a rare example.
That's smart and dope. You don't want, like, okay, say for example, you don't want the train companies. You want the tracks that the train run on. You get what I'm saying? It's like you don't want to build your house on somebody else's land because they could always take the house, you know. But you want to own the property and let somebody else build their house on your property, you know, land own house.
Example of the federal government actually running a transportation system on a day-to-day basis. Specifically, and perhaps bizarrely, it's a branch of the Army Corps of Engineers, that's responsible for keeping cargo on the river running. They build and run the locks, they dredge it and bolster its banks, and they're allocated over $1 billion a year to do it. And it's these locks that have quite literally kept the American agricultural industry alive. Brazil and the US, for example, are the world's first and second largest soybean exporters, respectively, tightly competing with each other to sell massive volumes of the crop to massive faraway buyers like China. But it's remarkable that the US, with a GDP per capita 8 times that of Brazil, is able to meaningfully compete in a global marketplace for a commodity where the only thing that matters to a buyer is cost. In Brazil, the majority of soybean is brought from farms to ocean ports by trucks, with most of the rest.
How much y'all think it would cost to start like a farm? You know, I got some cool gangster shit. You know, you do your own tractor and all that shit. How much do you think it would cost?
Transported by train, both far costlier than barges. Only a tiny portion is transported by water, as Brazil just does not have the inland waterway infrastructure that the US does. Most years, the cost of getting soybean from Brazil to China, for example, is far higher than that of the US, sometimes as much as double. US producers can therefore accept higher production costs since all they have to do is get their product to a river and from there all the way to Shanghai. But before any soy, chemical, or petroleum product is sent to intermingle with the world.
You know why I say, not say why I say, but Brazil is in South America, but on the east coast of South America, right? Well, the United States stretches east and west of the North American continent. You know what I'm saying? And it's just a bunch of rivers. To the northern of Brazil, you have different countries, Guyana, and you don't go past shit to my country. And I ain't touching that, and I ain't getting a piece of that action, respectfully. So it would be cheaper for the U.S. to do all this importing and moving around than it would be for Brazil.
Economy, it starts in a place like this harbor, where highway, railway, and a river intersect, and Trevero's Logistics Park Quebec sits. Here, goods, whether by belt and elevator or simple front loader, are poured into a barge operator's standardized 195-foot by 35-foot barge, then lashed together with steel cables to another 14 barges and pushed out into the river by diesel-powered towboats. Compared to most commercial vessels, crews on these towboats are small, typically less than 10 people composed of a captain, a pilot, a cook, and some engineers and deckhands. Almost universally, they work 6-hour on, 6-hour off schedules, non-stop for their entire time on board, typically a 28-day stretch. In practice, a given deckhand might work from 5:30 to 11:30 a.m., then attempt to get some sleep before starting work again at 5:30 p.m., before an abbreviated overnight rest starting at 11:30 p.m. The only crew member that doesn't follow this schedule is the cook, who will generally prepare meals to be ready 45 or so minutes before and after the 5:30 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 5:30 p.m. transitions. Crew facilities are also basic. Outside of bedrooms, these boats might have a small gym, crew lounge, and galley, but that's about it.
Nah, put some Starlink on that bitch from niggas.
After all, when working 12 hours a day, there's really not much time left for anything but sleeping and eating.
And fishing.
And there's plenty that gets done in those 12 hours on. Just 16 miles or 25 kilometers down the river from Trevero's Logistics Park sits Lock and Dam number 12. On the upper Mississippi, there's never more than a couple dozen miles to go before arriving to a lock and dam. Tows notify the lockmaster over radio when they're about 30 minutes away, which gives the operator time to prepare the lock, filling it with water if a boat's approaching from upstream, or draining if the opposite. Tow captains must approach each lock carefully, tightly lining up with the wall that marks its approach. After all, there's often a current, called an outdraft, pulling from the entrance of the lock towards the dam, since that's where the water flows when the lock is closed. Getting sucked into this current can, and sometimes does, prove disastrous. It'll trap a tow upstream of the dam and potentially destroy the structure, so captains will often have their own notes written down based on their own experience through the years, reminding them of the particularities of each lock. But upon successful approach, a tug pushes its barges into the lock chamber, or at least half of them. That's because the upper Mississippi has 600-foot locks, but the standard tow size through this stretch is 15 barges in a 3x5 configuration, leading to an overall length of about 1,000 feet. Therefore, deckhands have to spend about half an hour splitting their tow in two before the lockmaster can even close the gates and start draining the chamber. That takes about another 20 minutes, then the first half of the tow gets floated out and tied up as the second half, including the tug itself, waits another 20 minutes for the chamber to fill up with water again. Next, after another 20-minute draining cycle, it takes about an hour for deckhands to put the tow back together, leading to a roughly 3 to 4 hour process of getting through each and every lock. And that's if they're lucky. The locks each operate on a first-come, first-served system, meaning if there's another vessel going through, a tow has to wait up to 3 to 4 hours before it can go through the 3 to 4 hour process. In the peak fall grain export season, these delays can really compound and limit the throughput of the river just when it's needed most. And it's along this process, passing lock after lock,
That's how they
it's
are.
impossible to ignore that the Mississippi, nor the Illinois for that matter, nor the Columbia, nor the Upper Danube, nor the Lower Nile are strictly rivers anymore. It's one thing for a river to be deemed navigable in its simplest definition, to be sailed by ships or boats, but it's another to live up to the haughty standards of what's navigable to, say, the Army Corps of Engineers, whose definition hinges not on the possibility of making it up or down the river, but the continued, consistent reliability of travel along the river for the purpose of commerce. Rivers, no matter the state, country, or continent, are just fickle. Changing shape and course by the season and the year, they're difficult to govern physically and politically. Consider just the task of defining what the Mississippi River really is. At base, you could start with this map, but that wouldn't consider some of its most important tributaries, such as these. And still, this is oversimplified, as supplying a river that on average moves nearly 500,000 cubic feet of water through it every single second requires the tributaries of these tributaries, along with the unseen groundwater from across the river's entire basin, draining eventually into this cumulative flow. From this more holistic, albeit far from exhaustive view of the river, the Mississippi River's an assemblage of gravity-fed water from 41% of the lower 48's landmass spread across 32 American states and 2 Canadian
Talking about this, what this made me realize I can't swim.
provinces. As an amalgamation of precipitation spread across thousands of miles, the river's disposition is defined by its broader basin.
The arch. St. Louis. I don't know what it is about the city of St. Louis. Since I was a little boy, I've always had this urge or this need, let me say this, to visit the city of St. Louis. St. Louis, I'm coming to you guys. Don't know when, but I'm coming. Since I was a little boy, I don't know why. Just to see the fucking arch, just to see that. Don't know why.
Massive rain here, for instance, could lead to flooding along
I think probably when I was a little boy, I probably watched a movie when I had to be young. I probably watched a movie or something with the arch inside of it. Well, maybe just my fat ways thinking it's a McDonald's fucking arch. I don't know. But I don't know what it is, but yeah, that always had my interest. The city. If there's any place in the U.S. that had my interest, was St. Louis. Don't know why.
Below, as it did in 1927 when a swollen Mississippi killed 500 and left hundreds of thousands displaced. Massive earthquakes here could fundamentally reshape the river's path as they did in 1811 and 1812. And a low snow year here and a hot dry summer here could bring flows down to levels so low that it threatens grain shipping in the fall, as they did in 2012. On the inverse, what a river does provide that an interstate or rail line can't is the efficiency boost of buoyancy, and what a river offers that a canal can't is the natural plumbing, which, while not perfectly streamlined nor always dependable, provides a far more advanced starting point. To first turn a river into a navigable waterway capable of powering international commerce, there needs to be a legal framework as to who has purview over the river. In the US, beginning in the 1800s, as the fledgling federal government scrambled to create effective, efficient means of transportation to spur on economic activity, the responsibility of turning natural features into navigable ones fell on the US Army Corps of Engineers. On the Mississippi, their work began with this: the designation of the Mississippi River Commission and the exploratory mission to figure out how its flows could be harnessed for the purposes of interstate trade. First, the goal was to provide, from the upper river below, a consistent 4-foot or 1.3 meter deep channel. As time went on, the ask grew. Then it was a 4.5 foot deep channel, then a consistent 6-foot deep channel, then finally, with the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1930, a 9-foot or 3 meter deep channel. For the river's upper reaches, this meant
I don't know how deep is a meter.
Significant reconfiguration. Split at St. Louis, the Mississippi River has two rather distinct dispositions. From St. Paul to St. Louis, the river moves quicker, it's smaller in stature, and it's comparatively steep, dropping 400 feet or 120 meters over 670 miles.
Hey, let me know, what is that river, right? God damn it. I was in Savannah, Georgia. What is the name of the river where you on the, I don't know if it's Bay Street or, there's a lot of cargo ship coming through. Let me know, please. I hope somebody sees this. Please let me know down in the comment. What river is that in Savannah, Georgia? Is that a Georgia? Is it a Georgia river? I don't know. I just making up rivers at this point. I assume this is the Mississippi River. You know, Georgia River. But let me know if that's the Mississippi River.
Or 1,100 kilometers. Or it was. Now, just about wherever you zoom in on this upper section, it looks pretty uniform. It's wide, it's smooth, and every couple dozen miles, it's dammed. These dams and accompanying locks, all 27, aren't for storage or flood control, but for transportation, representing a massive 1930s federal investment in turning a wild river into a consistent canal for the benefit of Midwestern agricultural exporters upon which the whole region still relies. Some 90 years on, the Corps of Engineers still maintains and operates these locks, and in the intermediate decades, they've expanded to account for 192 navigational locks nationwide. The locks end at St. Louis, not long after the Mississippi has added the flow of the Illinois, and just before it adds the Ohio. And it's here where the river's character flips. From Cairo, Illinois to Vicksburg, Mississippi, the river has only 600 miles to travel to the Gulf Coast. But with only 300 feet or 100 meters of elevation to drop across that entire stretch, the river restlessly meanders across its massive historical floodplain, creating a winding path to the ocean that stretches out to over 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers. Through the lower Mississippi, average flows are high enough to deem navigational locks and dams unnecessary, but with so much water and so many bends along a flat landscape come other challenges for the Corps of Engineers. If one is to drive along a country road along the lower Mississippi, there's a good chance they can't see it, that it's on the other side of a grassy mound. If one is to look at the lower Mississippi from above, there's a good chance they'll notice that these grassy mounds don't meander like the river, but make unnatural, calculated, perfectly straight lines across the landscape. These are the over 2,000 miles of levee, built primarily by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, that millions count on to keep the flooding Mississippi out of their towns and homes when it does dump in the upper reaches of the basin, and that barge operators count on to keep the Mississippi in a single, dependable channel. Of course, levees, while noticeable to the trained eye, are easy to miss. The same can be said about locks and dams, just relatively low-lying structures spread across what seems to be a reasonably slow and easy-to-contain section of river. Like the structures, the continued upkeep of the river is easy to overlook too. Dredging, after all, isn't terribly visible to the outside observer. It's moving sand and silt and sediment from a river bottom. And yet, continued dredging to keep the channel at 9 feet deep from 2014 to 2023 in the upper Mississippi cost on average $45 million a year. The same goes for revetment, the process of stabilizing riverbanks with concrete matting. It's difficult to notice unless you put it in, and yet the Armor 1, a vessel tasked with laying down the matting to hold the river in place for another 50 years, cost a reported $125 million. All that's to say, while rightly paraded as a geographic superpower, navigable waterways are hardly natural systems. They're expensive to maintain hybrids with a heavy human touch. And in the case of most around the US, the critical human additions that make these safe and reliable for the frailest of barges and towboats are often overlooked and getting really old. Take locks. With most being built mid-century, or in the case of those around the Mississippi even earlier, nearly all have outlived their estimated 50-year expected lifespan. While still operational, they're increasingly unreliable. As a 2023 Department of Transportation report noted, from 2010 to 2020, across 192 lock sites, while total lockages have declined, the percentage of vessels delayed has climbed from the 30s into the 50s. More problematic, the average delay tripled in duration from
2020 was COVID, my bad. I was about to say, well, I was about to be like, oh wait, no, look, there's a 46. But nah, it's COVID. So shit, if COVID didn't happen, I'd probably been like a 54.
2010 to 2019. And while shipping companies can mitigate problems when it comes to planned delays, in 2020, about a third of all lock delays were unscheduled. In the American Society of Civil Engineers' most recent infrastructure report card, Inland Waterways received a D+, while noting that the Army Corps of Engineers reports both a $6.8 billion backlog on projects that have been approved but not financed, and $2.7 billion annually on funds not received to do annual required maintenance. Making things even more difficult and inland rivers even less dependable is less consistent weather and increasingly common and increasingly extreme weather events. The Mississippi has had low water years in 2012, in 2013, in 2022, 23, and 24, for instance,
that's fucked
also
up.
massively flooding in 2019. Then there's the fact that fundamentally, the locks along most American rivers are just too small to serve today's
Hey, Mississippi must have said, y'all can't stop complaining. 1 minute you complain because it's too dry. Next minute you complain it's too wet. Just, I know it's a serious thing. It's just a joke.
Purposes. Much discussion is made.
I'm gonna stop explaining
that the federal
myself.
government should upgrade the river to 1,200-foot locks, the size that could allow upper Mississippi tows to make their way through in one cycle rather than two. This would increase throughput enormously. The 3 or more hour process of passing a lock would go by in just 30 or so minutes, saving days of time across one Minneapolis to St. Louis journey. Delays at the locks, waiting for other traffic to clear, would become a thing of the past, and shipping rates might go down, allowing an ever so slightly expanded profit margin for farmers in Illinois
That's some real shit.
and beyond. And in fact, we'll even
I wanna take a
this
tour.
in practice. Construction has started at Lock 25, just north of St. Louis, to build a brand new 1,200-foot lock. Funding was secured as part of the Biden administration's Infrastructure Act, and construction is expected to be completed sometime in the 2030s.
Goddamn.
Also, the total amount allocated for the project was
And that's just one lock. That's the crazy thing.
sometime in the 2030s. Also, the total amount allocated for the project was $732 million. That's to say, upgrading the entire upper Mississippi's locks would possibly be a project rivaling the annual budget of NASA. And it's not like there's a lot of revenue that can pay for these upgrades. The Mississippi is completely free to use, including its locks. They'll open and close for any vessel, commercial or recreational,
Why
without
don't charge
a
them?
cent, at least directly. The federal government does charge a 29-cent per gallon tax on the fuel used by commercial barges on designated inland waterways in most circumstances, which goes into a trust fund that is primarily used for construction projects on the waterways rather than operations.
Okay.
So in 2020, for example, $131 million
And I guess to take money out of the trust fund too.
spending on inland waterways came from this fund, but this was out of a total annual cost of $1.1
Well, okay, if it's completely free, why you just don't charge them like something small, like not crazy, like $5? You know? If you can afford the fucking not no big corporation now. Them little tuk-tuks, them little choo-choos. Them little $5 for parks and true. You know? But them massive, them big, nah, you gotta pay some. You can't do that shit for free now. Respectfully.
$1.3 billion. So that's to say, the inland waterways effectively act as a massive subsidy from the American taxpayer to its users, particularly to the agriculture industry. One could, and some do argue that
That's the problem there.
for everyone to pay for a system that only benefits the few. This argument
Thank
is
you.
bolstered by the fact that what these waterways are particularly good at is getting bulk quantities of grain and soybean and other agricultural products to New Orleans to be transferred onto an ocean-going ship for international export. That's to say, in extreme cases, American taxpayers are paying to expand the profit margins of agribusinesses selling their soybean to China. This is true. Unlike roads, there is no significant direct utility for this transportation system for the general public. But right now, the Mississippi is in this state where it's extraordinarily expensive to run, but it's also underfunded. America does rely on it. While some of its utility is enjoyed by all the foreign countries that buy American crops, it simultaneously secures the domestic food supply, it transports raw materials that sit at the start of the supply chain for other industries. In fact, it's estimated that each day the river closes due to lock failure, for example, costs the American economy $300 million. But despite that, it's simultaneously underutilized. Far fewer barges traverse its stretch today than in decades past as freight traffic has moved onto the rails and roads. The rails and road systems are being stretched to their limits. Freight railroads are suffering from capacity shortages and fast deteriorating infrastructure due to their unwillingness to invest in capital improvements, while the trucking industry is suffering from a driver shortage as young people are unwilling to work in the increasingly aged industry. There has been plenty of discussion over developing a network of ports and vessels capable of transporting container cargo up and down the river so it can act as a direct competitor to freight rail and trucks, but so far, little has translated into action. The issues of inefficiency and deterioration on the Mississippi are so well recognized that barge operators themselves successfully advocated to be taxed more. They were the driving force behind the hike from 20 to 29 cents per gallon in 2014 because they so desperately wanted maintenance and upgrades. but it still wasn't even close to enough. Right now, the Mississippi and America's other inland waterways are funded and functional enough that they're relied on by whole industries and responsible for the economic ascent of entire regions, but not funded enough that they actually function even close to their full potential. That's to say, they're great enough to have changed the entire course of American history, but they're still just not great. One thing I noticed while researching this video is that quite a few academics have attempted to solve the issue of Mississippi River lock delays using data science. After all, even the busiest locks are used well below their theoretical capacity, but still experience delays due to a lack of traffic management. This is a great example of how knowledge in STEM subjects can help solve real-world problems, and our sponsor, Brilliant, is
Y'all got me. Y'all got me. Y'all got me.
clear explanations, interactive exercises.
Nah, that's an ad. Fuck out of here. But that's dope. I feel like it's cool to learn about a whole different world that didn't even know exists. You know, I didn't even know it was a whole thing. Like I started there, I was like, I saw water, I saw red, so I just went with it. You know, but that was pretty cool. Pretty cool. I never thought about that. But if you guys are new to the channel, smash that like button, subscribe, comment down below, and let me know what you want to see in the next one. I'm out. Peace.